might come for salmon, but not very many. They don't come for smallmouth bass, they come for walleyes. Let's get it fixed and get it going forward, get it back like it used to be. That's my opinion. Now, don't want me to talk about what we've done. Like I said, August 1st, we started talking, started making phone calls, contacts, email back and forth. And I have not talked to anyone yet that has a negative reaction to what we're doing. They all want more walleyes in the system, everybody. And, you know, we can, like I said before, we can point fingers at tournaments, guides, game and fish, Corps of Engineers, it doesn't matter. Going forward, if there's enough walleyes in the system, all of that negativity goes away. So let's get it fixed and get it back. And these guys are working with us. We found out in one of the meetings that they're going to put 2.8 million fingerlings in next year with some gizzard shad, which is a good forage base for us. I think that's awesome. One of the things that I learned at one of the meetings is this RAS facility, the recirculating aquacultural system, is the latest, greatest fish hatchery that's been online for probably since 2008, 2009, somewhere in there, other areas. We have one up in Springs that Michael Barnes and some other people that they have employed have put together. It's a phenomenal little facility. And there's a new building right next to it that they're planning on doing another one, but they're waiting for some tanks, pumps, or something. And I'm sure Mark Pinsel will address that issue. In my opinion, these things are the answer to our problem. Let's get these walleye fry raised. They can raise walleyes. I think somebody had told me, Michael Barnes, he raised a walleye to 14 inches in 1 year. And if they get the eggs, they can breed them 3 times a year. And they can kick these things out like crazy without all the outdoor ponds and all the raceways and all that stuff. It's a phenomenal facility. We need to get more of those going. And I think the state is on board with that, but I also heard John Lott say at one of our meetings, it's going to be 5 to 7 years to get these things online. Well, the impatience in me, I'm not a government employee. I didn't come from that realm. I came from a private industry. So if we wanted to do something, we made a decision and we did it. I understand there's more of a process when it comes through state game and fish, but I want to see more urgency from my perspective. And I think we're going to get there. I think we are getting there. Also, I want to talk a little bit about the recirculating systems. I visited the one in Claiborne Springs. Phenomenal little presentation, and I think he's got a video somewhere. This is Michael Barnes. They took the old administrative building, and it's an octagon sheet precast concrete building. And Brian, I think it is, and Michael Barnes, a couple of employees, basically put this thing together out of their coffee money from their budget. And when I was in there, they had muskie, they had trout, they had walleyes. I think they might have had some salmon in these little tanks. They're little 6 and 8 foot diameter tanks where they filter the water and they give it some kind of food. I'm not sure the technical process. But instead of having to put them out in the ponds and rear them, they raise these things with fingerling in the summer, I think by heat and light and controlling the temperature. And it's a phenomenal little system. And they're a tenth of the cost of putting in a new hatchery in the outdoors. We're asking them to try and do 2 or 3 of these. They're talking about doing one at Brookings because they need biologists to man it and staff it. But one there, I've got some ideas, but I got to be careful. We built a salmon spawning station down at Whitlock in the early 80s. I think that'd be a great place for one too. And you can still put salmon out of there if you want to once in a while. But, you know, we're in hopes that they get these moving and get going because for these things to kick out the walleye fingerling that we need going forward, I think it'd be phenomenal. Yeah, if we get that one at Claiborne Springs going, my recommendation is designate it for walleye until we get the other ones built, and let's get this thing stocked and fed. It'd be perfect for me. Okay, I can talk all my opinions all I want, but the other thing that we've done is, let's see, I visited with Selby Sportsman Club on the 21st of September, had a nice visitation and meeting with them, told them what we're doing. I went up to Sakakawea fishing, and I stopped and visited with Garrison Fish Hatchery because we were under the understanding we could buy fingerlings from them. We were wrong. They have to work through state game and fish agencies instead of private. Found that out. Talked to Paul Bailey, who is the counterpart, the game and fish, like John Lott is here, to my understanding. He's the head of the fisheries up there. Had quite a nice conversation with him. Some of my concern that I shared with him is you can catch 5 fish over 20 inches. You go right across the border in Pollock and it's 1 over 20. Personally, I think that hurts our breeding stock. I really do. No, they tell me no, but I can't see how it doesn't. But they're smarter than I am. They're the biologists. But anyhow, we had nice conversations, very receptive to what our thoughts are. Also, when we got done with that, on October 11th, we had a nice Zoom meeting with Emma Hauser from University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point, up in Wisconsin. They've got a northern aquacultural property on Lake Superior. They've been there since 2008, I think, somewhere in there. And they, as far as first in the industry, there's some in Iowa and then some up there. They've been doing this for years. And I believe some of these might have started because of commercial industry. They were looking for walleyes for menus for restaurant, but they have proven that they can breed these fish, raise them, and stock them into the natural environment, and they reproduce like they are normal fish. They are not a hybrid. So I'm very positive about going forward with these RAS systems. And I hope the state is as well. And let's see, okay, then we had another meeting on the 12th, public meeting, and I think some of you were there. I thought it was a very good meeting. My takeaways on that, I wrote a little note to Bill Wackerly the next day. I said, we heard there's 2.8 stocked in 2023. I think that's great. The 1,200 gizzard shad stocked in 23 again. I think that's great. But that's where I heard the fact that the hatcheries were going to be 5 to 7 years to get on board. It bothered me a little bit. I want to see it go faster. I don't know if it's going to or not, but that's my opinion. And basically, that's all we've done. We've gone out the boats with them and done some gill netting, I guess, just to see what that's all about. They were very receptive to let us go along. And other than that,
Justifies to the commission.
we went down to the commission. That's correct. That's correct. I've got something I'm going to share, and I know Mark's going to get into the stocking numbers and stuff, but if you read through state game and fish stocking numbers, I think it's very interesting. Find my page so I don't tell you the wrong notes. Oahe, which is Dewey County, I'm assuming that's Gettysburg area. 1983 to 1993, how many fish, fingerlings fried, do you think they stocked in there? 10-year period. If everybody remembers, 80s and 90s were pretty good fishing. That time frame, they put 78,208,543 fingerlings in fried. Since 2007, 94 to 2007, they put 5,600,000, and then 2007 they put 6 million fry. And Mark and I talked about that. Fry really don't do much good because they're food for other fish. But since 2007, they didn't stock anymore until 2017. I personally believe those are the year classes we're missing. A lot of them. I had, we built the salmon spawning station down in the 80s. There was a biologist from Fish Pro out of Springfield, Illinois. I can't remember his name, but he told me his 10% rule. And I said, what do you mean by that? He said, well, fish in the natural environment, their eggs, 10% of those eggs will get fertilized and hatch. Out of those fertilized eggs, 10% of those will grow into fry. Out of those fried, 10% of those will grow into fingerlings. And then 10% of those might get to a catchable fish. So if you put 2 million fry in there, you might get 2,000 fish. These RASs, one of the purposes, in my opinion, for that is we can skip 2 of those 10% steps. We take them, fertilize, take them to the fry, take them to the fingerling stage. We've saved, now we've got 200,000 instead of 2,000, which I think is an important fact. 10% of 10% of 10%. So when you see stocking 78 million fry and fingerlings in there, it's not as many fish as you think. Really, all I had, Bill. Again, I can't speak highly enough about these RASs and pushing going forward. I hope the state's on board with doing it. I know some of these guys are, but there's other higher ups sometimes that they aren't as excited about it. I facetiously made a statement to Mark and John when we were up in Oak Ridge. I said, if we don't get these walleyes back here, we don't need you guys around. And they looked at me and I said, well, tell me I'm wrong. You don't want to answer them.
Bill's always pretty candid. Thank you, Bill. You're doing a wonderful job. Let's hear it for Bill. He put a lot of effort. He range out there pretty quickly. It's not his fault because he's going to do everything possible to make that happen. And again, these aquaculture hatcheries are key to this. We need large numbers. Our friends down south are already complaining that we're getting all the fingerlings. How come they aren't getting any? This coalition is for Lake Oahe. It's not northern Lake Oahe, southern Lake Oahe. We need to get enough fingerlings and maybe some juvenile or adult walleyes to satisfy all the needs for Lake Oahe and all of the other lakes and reservoirs in South Dakota, so we can be a walleye capital of the United States like we ought to be. We've got 270,000 acres of lake out there just in Lake Oahe, so we need to take advantage of that. Well, you know, part of our whole game in this cost analysis is tourists, fishing. How many are coming? What effect does it have? We're also worried about our ramps and our access to the lake. We have Ryan Parsoon here, District 13 Parks Manager, is going to give us a breakdown from his perspective.
There we go. Yeah. Yes, I'm Ryan Pursuit. I'm the District 13 Park Supervisor. My team and I have 2 offices. I'm based out of West Woodlawn with half the team. The other half is up in Oak Ridge out of the Indian Creek office. And together we cover the highlighted yellow area, which is the middle and upper Oahe. So I guess that's kind of why I'm here, mainly because I'm 2/3 operator of the Lake Oahe accesses and parks. And obviously people that come fishing come through the majority of areas that my staff would supervise. So statistics. Coming here, I kind of thought I might be the opening act for the big show, but now I see I'm maybe half the entertainment and just what you guys want to listen to are statistics and campground. But I want to talk a little bit about visitation. I pulled up the last 4 years, ending in December of 2022 and going 4 years prior. And I analyzed visitation, which I'll show you in a little bit. Visitation is based off of traffic numbers. Every primary area has a traffic number that counts the vehicle coming in. It does not count the vehicle and trailer. We have a lot of parameters that we can set on them. And depending on if we're counting 1 lane of traffic or 2 lanes, some roads are best for in and out. We set multipliers to that. So basically glean the number of vehicles in an area in any given day, week, month, year. From that, we have done studies. Maybe at some time you guys have gotten stopped. And a survey was provided for you by the Parks Division, asking about how many people are in your vehicle, you know, what is your main reason for coming to recreation areas, a lot of information that we utilize. The main thing that we utilize when it comes to visitation is how many people are in that vehicle. So when we count a vehicle coming in the park, every area has an average based on a survey. We do surveys every 5 years. Right around 2.19 is the average number of people per vehicle coming into our parks. So that's where our visitation numbers come into play, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. 2.17 is the average for Swan Creek, for example. Camping units, that's how many nights that a camping fees were collected in a recreation area annually. And then revenue, we're going to talk about our revenue sources, or revenue total. And our sources are our daily park entrance licenses. That could be the day pass that somebody who doesn't frequent may buy versus the annual sticker. The annual park entrance license is that sticker that you put on your vehicle. And then, of course, we've got camping fees. And I just want to reiterate that we do collect fees year round. A lot of people ask me that. You don't collect fees the winter time. Fees goes towards snow removal, access, availability and things like that. So just keep in mind that even when you're going to a recreation area, I'm going to plug here, to access the ice, a park entrance license is still required on your vehicle. And that helps us keep that open and facilitated. Annual visitation history. Again, like I said, 4 years. We've got 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, and there's a lot of variables that affect all of these: visitation, camping revenue. You can't always pinpoint exactly what it is, but we kind of get a feeling through history on what is creating the highs and the lows. As you can see, from 2019 to 2020, we had a considerable increase. COVID. That's one of the main reasons. South Dakota was open. Our neighboring states were not. You could not go into a state park or recreation area in Minnesota or your neighboring states. So we had a lot of influx of people getting out of their areas to come to South Dakota to be in the outdoors and not have to be tied up in quarantine. A lot of them were working remotely. Some of them were laid off for a while. And that opened the doors to recreation. So we saw a big influx in visitation from 19 to 2020. That kind of held through the same thing into 2021. There's other factors, of course, but I feel like COVID was kind of the main driver for why we had so many people. Now, in 2022, we had a little bit of a dip down. There could be a lot of factors. The factors could be economics, fuel prices, maybe it's fishing. I don't know. We can't really tell you exactly what that is. But in my district, again, middle and upper Oahe, as a whole, we're down 4% over last year. The statewide total for visitation is down 7%. So if you think about that, we did pretty good. We are above average statewide for number of people coming to our areas. So that's just kind of something I wanted to point out when it comes to visitation. Camping history. Again, you can see a little bit of rise from 19 to 20 and kind of staying steady all the way to 2022. We haven't seen a drop in camping over last year. We've actually seen a 1% rise. Statewide total, 1%. So right on par with our statewide average from last year to this year. So we really haven't seen a drop in number of people that are coming camping. Revenue. Again, we have those revenue sources: our day passes, our annual stickers, and camping fees all put together. You can see how much money we brought into District 13 and 19, 20, 21, 22. Kind of stays real close to the same graphical data that you saw from the visitation and camping. But we did see a 3% decrease in revenue over last year. Now keep in mind too, that this is only revenue that's accounted that we take in my areas. Now, people can still purchase stickers online, day passes online. They can purchase them somewhere else in the state, and they're good statewide. So it could be that people are purchasing stickers or day passes online, and I'm not getting the credit for that number. That always has a little bit of play into it. So somebody else might be actually getting the credit for revenue of people coming to my areas. Or somebody's local who is in Watertown, they buy a park sticker to go to Cassie, but one time they come over to my area. So I don't really see that. But when you look at the statewide total, we may be down 3%. Statewide is only down 1% in revenue over last year. So I'm very happy with those numbers. I don't feel like we're seeing a big dip. I don't know what the future will hold. We've got water levels and access issues at times, frustrations at times that play a part in a lot of this, especially some of my southern areas like down at Bush's Landing. When it comes to the question on what is it like to get down there, I've definitely seen a drastic decrease in users because of that. We haven't really seen it up here. We've tried very hard to be proactive, to keep our accesses available to you at all times. Yes, there's times where Mother Nature comes to play, throws the wind at us, and we have siltation that inconveniences people. We get that. But we heartfully try to get to that as soon as possible so it doesn't impact you guys negatively. So switching gears a little bit, I want to talk a little about boat ramps, especially boat ramps in 2022. The pictures that we see here are what we see after when we have low waters. This is the east boat ramp at Swan Creek. We're not going to be on that ramp anytime soon. There are issues, low water ramps, really long walk down a primary ramp. I get the inconveniences, and we're doing our best to ensure that we still facilitate accesses. This is Little Bend high water ramp. It's kind of the same story. We are on a low water ramp there. Anytime you go into low water ramps, you sometimes can dabble into issues, and typically it's siltation. So some of the biggest issues that we've had, I think I got pictures in the next slide, are siltation issues. This is Bob's Landing. One of the main areas that we have siltation. Obviously, we have to clean silt off the Swan Creek and some northern areas. Little Bend, Bob's, Westwood Lock, this last summer have been challenging. What we do is we bring a long reach excavator, a telehandler out, and we try to scoop it, and we get it out of there. The wind blows, it might blow right back into it. It's a challenge, and we're hoping that this 2023 doesn't look bad when it comes to siltation, but if the water doesn't come up, I'm afraid it might. But we're going to deal with it. I've got the equipment and the manpower, well, hopefully, to accommodate getting after these areas and keep them clean. And sometimes we have to bring in a long reach excavator and really reach out there and dig deep to get a long time frame of a clean ramp versus doing it every other day. So forecast information. This is right off the Corps of Engineers website. I don't speculate. I don't know really what's going on. I can look up and see, well, there's 100% snowpack in the mountains right now. I do know that we need about 150 to 200% snowpack to see some of that water in Milwaukee. When we get that, we don't know. That usually peaks in October. Usually in April, I think is when the mountain snowpack peaks. So we have a little bit of time yet, and hopefully they get some moisture that will trickle down. We can see the average, the actual. Our current levels today is 1590.4. I pulled that off this morning, actually. So, yeah, I wish it was higher. I think we all do, but it is what it is. We're dealing with it as it comes. This is a 3-week tabular. Again, all these things, you can get those off the Corps of Engineers website. But you can see we are expected to rise up to, that 15, just shy of 1593, we'll call it. So we are expecting a little bit of rise. I know all of you at ice fishing can see that rise right now. I hope it continues without mucking up our shorelines. With this cold weather, I see a lot of them refroze, so that's a good thing. It's always a hope and a battle. So these are all the elevations. I'm not going to get into those. I don't want to really compromise this evening with all these numbers, but we do keep track of where our top and bottom elevations are for all the programs. And I manage accordingly when it comes to water levels. Now, bottom elevations have always been a question. Just because concrete goes down a long way, does that mean that we have a shoreline that hasn't risen up from siltation? So, again, we have the numbers. I just don't really want to spend a whole lot of time diving into every ramp and the elevations of it. But I'm kind of a geek when it comes to numbers world, and I rely on this information to provide access. That's really it. Any questions for me? If not, I do want to end by saying I really do appreciate the patience. I appreciate the users. A lot of people depend on boat ramps and access to the river. If you don't have access, you can't catch fish. I realize that there's professionals, there's businesses that rely on that, and there's personal people who want to just personally recreate. I appreciate you guys very, very much, and we try very hard. My staff and I are do our diligence to ensure that we're doing what we can to make sure that all things are facilitated. But if you ever find a time where it's not, my office line is always available. Give me a call. I'm glad to hear from our users and say, hey, we've got a little bit of issue. We've got a rock people hitting the lower unit on or something. Nobody knows it better than people with the boots on the ground. And a lot of times my boots are in an office or behind the steering wheel. So let us know, please. With that, I thank you.
Boy, the Creek Training Station is, this gentleman right here worked very close with us throughout that whole process. When him and Mr. Hines made that happen, need to thank him. That was our real first experience of working closely with Game Fish and Parks, and I was impressed. And our next man up has been a wonderful supporter of our efforts. He's been easy to deal with, very knowledgeable. He doesn't have enough fish for us yet, but I guarantee you he's working on it. Mr. Mark Bissell, he's a Missouri River fishing supervisor.
These guys will be then. I know. If you guys didn't take your rest break during the half hour intermission, you're gonna miss it.
Thanks, Ryan. It's always the jokester. So my name is Mark Hinsel, and I'm the fish supervisor for the Upper Missouri River Fisheries Management Area. Supervise 5 full-time biologists that are spread between Mobridge and Fort Creeger, and pretty much manage the fisheries of Lake Oahe, Lake Sharp, and then the surrounding small impoundments. This is going to be some excerpts from the public presentations we gave up in Mobridge a few months ago. We just gave this presentation in here on Tuesday. Tomorrow we're heading to Rapid, and hopefully probably mid-February, end of February. So this is only probably 7 or 8 slides, kind of the main bullet points from that presentation. So for management of Lake Oahe, we split it into 2 zones, right? We have the upper zone and the lower zone. And we do that because both of these areas, the walleye fisheries in these areas act very different historically. Upper zone, which extends from like 212 Bridge up to the border, classified as very high walleye abundance. Generally, the size structure is a little bit smaller, so you have a lot of fish, though they're a little bit smaller, and good recruitment. You always have new fish coming into the system in Upper Lake Oahe, historically. Lower zone is pretty much the exact opposite. The lower zone extends down from 212 Bridge down to Dam. Historically, very low abundance, but we had a really good size structure. We always had really big Lake Oahe, lower Lake Oahe. And weak recruitment, variable recruitment. Some years we'd have fish coming into the system, but in most years we didn't have a lot of those fish replacing themselves. So we kind of break it up because they do act so differently. One of the reasons I brought that up is throughout this talk, we're going to be talking about lower Oahe and upper Oahe quite a bit. So just remember, upper Oahe is from the 212 Bridge up to the border, and lower Oahe is 212 Bridge down. So a little bit of history. I mean, everybody here, I'm sure, is familiar. 2011 flood was, catastrophic to the Missouri River fishery. We lost over 90% of our smelt in a matter of months. And that left us with a predator-prey imbalance. Many of you will remember some of those fish out there that looked like cigars. I mean, they were skinny, they were dying. Natural mortality was rampant, and fish were starving to death. Ended up seeing is about in 2014, 2015, that predator-prey imbalance fixed itself by a lot of the walleye dying. So the food that was left in there started, being available to the remaining walleye. Growth started to increase, conditions started to increase, and again, this was leading up to 2014, 2015. But the problem was that we had very few walleye in the system, right? What happened in 2011 had already done its deed and wiped out the majority of the walleye. So we saw very, very low abundance of walleye about 2013, 2014, 2015. One of the things to note is that the drop in walleye abundance was extensive on the lower end, much more so than the upper end. So we saw that crash on the lower end, and it was something you see. It was probably the fastest, or I know it was the fastest that walleye had left the system in Lake Oahe since it was built back in the 60s. So what did we do? Obviously, we saw walleye numbers were low, so we started stocking. And that was the first thing that we wanted to do. So starting in 2017, we stocked over 5 million fry and almost 5 million fingerlings. Now, the one thing that we did is we really focused on lower Lake Oahe because that was the area that we saw the biggest change in walleye numbers. The biggest drop we saw, the numbers of walleye were on lower Lake Oahe. So we concentrated those stockings on lower Lake Oahe. You know, the Whitlocks and Swan Creek area, but by and large, most of those fish went into lower Lake Oahe. And you can see up there, we put them in a lot of different areas throughout lower Lake Oahe, but again, focusing on that lower Lake Oahe. The other thing we did is every time we stock walleye, we want to make sure that there's food out there. And we started stocking gizzard shad in 2012. And when I say we stock gizzard shad, we actually go out and capture pre-spawn adult gizzard shad. So these are gizzard shad that still have the eggs in them, put them up before they spawn into Lake Oahe and allow them to spawn naturally. And in doing so, you know, produce a food resource for that summer pretty much right away. Gizzard shad are important because they can produce hundreds of thousands of eggs. You know, compare that to a walleye that might have tens of thousands of eggs. You know, you're looking at close to 500,000 eggs in some of those big gizzard shad. So they can produce a lot of food for our walleye, and they can do it really quick. The other nice thing with gizzard shad is they have a protracted spawn. So it's not like walleye that spawn once, then they're done for the year. Gizzard shad, you put them in, they keep spawning. They keep spawning. As long as that water temperature is above 60 degrees, they will just keep going, producing more and more young. So that's kind of like why you see in the fall, a lot of people that fish late in the fall, you'll have gizzard shad that are a range of sizes, right? You'll have 6-inch shad all the way down to 2-inch shad. And those are fish that are continually being produced throughout the summer. Great resource for walleye. So we started in 2012, stocked all the way through 2022. And again, by and large, we really focused where we were stocking those walleye. We want to put those walleye in and give them something to eat within that first year. We did have a couple stockings up in North Dakota. After the flood, North Dakota experienced some changes to the river up there. The number of crayfish up in North Dakota all the way down to Pollock was in pretty bad condition. So we did focus some of those stockings up there with the idea that they would filter down into upper Lake Hawaii at the very, very top. So we started stocking in 2017, and what have we found since we started stocking? So here, the colors look pretty similar, but on the left side, you have what we call CPUE, and this is the number of fish per net when we go out there and survey. The black line is upper Lake Oahe, the gray line is lower Lake Oahe. And the first thing that's striking when you look at this is how many more initially in 2017 there were in upper Lake Oahe compared to lower Lake Oahe. When I said lower Lake Oahe was low, it was much lower than upper Lake Oahe. But we started stocking lower Lake Oahe right away and kind of turned the corner. The last couple of years, we had it going in a good direction as far as the numbers of fish on the lower end. But unfortunately, we're still continuing to see that slow decline of just the number of walleye in upper Lake Oahe. So, I mean, since 2017, walleye abundance is improving on the lower end, but it's continuing to climb at the upper end. But walleye condition, it's good. You know, it's not great, it's good. Growth is below what we like to see. It's still within average when you look across, you know, all the different growth rates of walleye within the state. But we'd really like to see that growth improve a little bit more too. And what plans going forward, quite simply, is to start stocking up upper Lake Oahe now. You know, we've kind of turned the corner with lower Lake Oahe. Now it's time to focus on upper Lake Oahe. So next year we're going to stock 2.8 million. You're fine. 2.8 million next year. We're going to focus these stockings on from the 212 bridge up to the dam. And then at the same time, we're going to stock a lot of gizzard shad. And there's lots of reasons why gizzard shad are a great food resource for walleye. Be happy to talk with you if you ever, want to have questions about that. But great resource. This next year, we're going to try to move 1,200 adults from South Dakota. So these are our internal track and transfers up to Upper Lake Oahe. Something exciting, we're working with our counterparts in Kansas. We're going to be able to get our hands on hopefully 4,500 adults from Kansas and bring them up here this next spring. Again, the shad are going to go, we put the walleye, right? So we're going to put the walleye in, and then within a couple of weeks, we're going to go put shad in and create fish that are hatching out. Now, this is just some data that Bill asked me to put together. Apparently, everybody had some questions on tournaments on Lake Oahe and how much harvest is coming out of these tournaments. So I went back and looked through all the data that we have. So we don't actually have any information on the amount of harvested per tournament. That's not something we ask our tournament directors. But we do know how many tournaments there are. We know how many anglers are in the tournament and how many days that tournament goes on for. So on the left side of this table, we have the year 2013 through 2019. I left out 2020 because it was COVID year and tournaments, the number of tournaments went down quite a bit. So we just kind of included what we would call the average years, 2013 through 2019. Next column is the number of tournaments that were held on Lake Oahe, the number of angler days. So if a tournament had 100 people in it, and there was a 2-day tournament, that'd be 200 angler days, right? Days an angler could fish that tournament. Potential harvest. This is the number of fish that could potentially be harvested if every single person harvested a limit of fish on every day of that tournament. So we all know, watching tournaments and how many come in where, people don't weigh fish or maybe people only weigh a handful of fish. This is a very liberal estimate of what the harvest is. Most of these tournaments don't come anywhere close to that. But again, we don't have the information to know exactly how many walleye were actually caught during that tournament. This is just the best information that we have. So you look at potential harvest, we're hovering right around 20,000, maybe a little bit more than that, depending on the year, if it was a big tournament year or not. Total walleye, anywhere from 100,000, 200,000, just depends on what the catch and the bite is that year. But if you look at it, the percentage of the total harvest that comes from tournaments doesn't ever get more than 21%, something like that. And that's figured in if every single person in that tournament caught a limit of fish every single day. And that's what we're looking at. So killing all the fish at most, at the absolute most, and we know this is a very liberal estimate, maybe 1 out of 5 fish are harvested through the tournament structure. That's all I had for the presentation portion, but definitely if you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Bill's absolutely right. The RAS systems are something that we're very excited about. We do have some news about the RAS system in Brookings that Jake can share with you guys, but
all right. Thanks, Mark. Again, Jake Davis, I'm Program Administrator, help oversee fisheries management of the state. And just wanted to give an update. Our secretary was in front of Senate Ag and Natural Resources this week talking about it. We are looking at putting a RAS facility on the campus of SDSU. That is a few years out, a handful. The primary reason is really just the finance side of it. These facilities are not cheap. And I did want to cover just along those lines that was mentioned here, the facilities that we've got out in Rapid City that are utilizing this RAS technology really is something that was developed on the commercial side to produce fish for food. The ability that you can control the temperature is right on as far as what allows us to manipulate those systems because we can control that water within it. It's a contained system. The amazing thing is that once we started really investing into this, and I say that because what happened at Cleghorn was really just the ingenuity of our staff. It was less than 2 years ago that we hatched our first walleye in these systems. And one of the reasons that we're working into it the way we are is that we're still operating 3 full-time production facilities that cost a lot of money to maintain for all the production of fish within the state. And what our staff was doing at Cleghorn and even McNinney is above and beyond that. Really what they've done is just use the skills that they have to create these systems I can tell you personally that it was less than 2 years ago that I stocked the first fry in our state walleye fry that were hatched in a raft system. And it was basically in their shop at a very makeshift RAS that they kind of slapped together. When they stocked it, I was the area supervisor in Rapid City, and they called me and said, they actually hatched. We got to get you to put them somewhere. And now we're less than 2 years later, and we've got walleye that are less than a year old and 8 inches in length. So we've really come a long way. In fact, I'd say we're, in our opinion, a year ahead of where we thought we would be. And so that's very positive moving forward. But again, as we move into this, we're trying to find ways to essentially add on to what we're already currently doing. Because again, with this addition, we're still operating those 3 production facilities at full capacity with the same budget. So that's something I did want to touch on. But again, that facility at SDSU, the way we're looking at doing it is, again, it's a handful of years down the road. And a lot of that is just on the planning and budgeting side. Additionally, we don't know what it would cost because depending on where it's located and when you start designing a potential floodplain analysis, there's still a lot of steps there. But it is a technology that's really showing, again, the things that we can do in that closed system. Another positive benefit I'll say is in the area of aquatic invasive species. I'm sure hopefully everybody in this room has heard about AIS and the concerns that we have. One of the nice things with these raft systems is because everything is self-contained, it really takes AIS out of the equation when we're talking about raising fish. So I just wanted to cover that quickly, and then we can jump into more comments, questions, whatever works for you gentlemen.
Is there ever a possibility that you would be a partnership with a private AIS facility?
So the question was the possibility of a partnership for a private raft system. What I'll say is I'm sure we're open to the discussion. I can tell you those decisions are made above my pay grade. But
I understand, but from what I've heard, these things are expensive. I understand, but not as expensive as a full-fledged blue dog hatchery. Get these things up and running. Would you lease one from a private to let them run it? I mean, we need walleye fingerlings in Oahe, however we can. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to speed the process up and skip the 5 to 7 years, and let's get going next year.
Sure, and I would say we're open to discussions on just about everything because in a lot of cases too, we're still learning what these systems can do. When we talk about partnering with another private hatchery, we don't actually have a formula to give them, for example, and here's what you need to do X, Y, Z to raise fish for this side because we're learning that right now. I mean, to say that in less than 2 years, we've gone from being able to hatch fry, which we didn't know we could do, to now having 8-inch fish on station is a big step for it. But at the same time, we're learning how much we have to feed them because we found out if we didn't kick the feed to them, they cannibalize. That was information we didn't know until we got there. So again, we don't have the manual yet to even say, here's what you need to do to get them to this size.
Jake, how far along do you think, or how far away do you think that new building on Claiborne Springs is from becoming operational? The building itself is standing, curb and gutters in, everything's in there. We're just waiting for tanks and pumps, I understand.
Yep. So we're really waiting for the ability to purchase those materials and hope that there's no delay in getting those materials on station. Once they are there,
That's a difference, waiting for the ability to purchase them or waiting for tanks.
Right.
It's a big difference.
It is. But I wish I could say right now that we have the approval to go forward, but we don't at the moment right now. The hope is that we can get it any time. But that's also just part of the process that we work with as far as how our budgeting works. And again, as I mentioned, we're doing this on top of our standard budget that we use to fund those 3 production facilities. And this is work that goes on top of that. So with that, again, so the way that our budgeting works essentially from a hatchery, it's basically a status quo every year. We get federal funds from Dingell-Johnson Act. Those funds don't change. And so with that, they're portioned out with all of aquatics, but essentially a lot with our hatcheries. That's a primary funding source for them. But they haven't changed. We still have needs at those other 3 facilities, Cleghorn included. So with that, we just, again, working within the constraints that we have.
Again, I go back to the question, is there a possibility of some kind of private-public partnership? If so, I guarantee you, we can make some phone calls and get some money put together and get that thing furnished and up and running.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't take much, but somehow the process has to get started.
Right.
You can't just sit and wait. Or, I looked at the sales tax numbers throughout these counties. They aren't good for some of these businesses. they're dropping like flies.
Right.
I think Kevin, this will be about 18%. Chad and Shonda and their hotels are down 20 or 30%, whatever it is. And that's all gonna come into play for the state if this doesn't get corrected. The longer we wait, private business versus public is a little different. And I understand, but if you understand, if there's some direction we can go to help this thing become a partnership, let us know, we'll work on it, we'll do it. We're here to fix the problem, not to point fingers.
No, I absolutely appreciate that, and I know we'll have more conversations on it.
Thank you, sir. Good information. No, again, as I said earlier, these new hatcheries are the key to this whole thing. And it's difficult for the state. They have a system and a budgeting system they have to work through. It's cumbersome, frustrating to the biologists, I'm sure. I know some of them have been wanting to do this more aggressively for some time. But we're in a position with this big coalition where we can do a number of things. We can get additional funding for their staff. We can get additional funding for the centers. We can get private enterprise to build them and lease them back to the state if need be. Because of all your support and the number of people that have got behind us to help us with this. So we work with Game Fish and Parks, we're working with the governor's office and secretary of the commission, and we will do whatever we have to do to help these guys provide us with the fish we need to keep this fishery alive. They want to do it. You know, they can't get there. When you're on the inside, sometimes you can't get what you want very easily. That's kind of, I do appreciate your candor, and that Brookings is a real key to a lot of this. And if we can get 2 more built, and you guys can start raising adult females in LPH inside and raise our own, and we don't have to go into the river and net them out. We're on a roll, and that's where we're headed, ladies and gentlemen. We're headed to that point, so we need to work hard together to make that happen. You can put up that next slide. He might have lost it. I've got it here. He lost it. You know, they offered 2.8 in the gizzard shad that you seen on there earlier, which was wonderful. We would like more. We'd like enough fingerlings to cover all Lake Oahe, not northern or southern, but enough to stock up and down the river, and enough forage fish to feed them, so we can keep them alive and keep them thriving. We'd like them to increase those quantities over what they have recommended. However, as you've heard them say, they only have so many hatcheries and so many fingerlings available. Kansas will help us with the gizzard shad. That will make a big difference. Again, the recirculating systems, the aquaculture hatcheries are critical. One way or another, not 5 years, not 7 years, we need to get them online in the next 3 or 4 years. Not 1, but 2. They need the staff to run them, the trained personnel. I know they're gonna have a heart attack when you hear me saying this. The young man over there is gonna have to deal with all that, but we really need that. You know, if you're gonna have 5 to 10 million walleye fingerlings available every year, you need the hatcheries to raise. You're gonna raise your adult females and milk them inside and raise your own fish without having to go in the river after them. It's gonna take more facilities and more staff. And the legislature's starting to hear about it. Tuesday, when we meet with Michael Barnes, he's gonna work with the inside, the money guys and here, so that the Game Fish and Parks may be able to get supplementary funds to make this happen. Because there's a lot of revenue other than what you guys have access to that might be able to be used. So we're gonna work with you on that as well. We also would like to get volunteers in each area from Peter up to Pollock to go out with the game fish when they put the gizzard shad in and when they put the fingerlings in. We'd like you to observe that. If you have a GoPro camera, we'd like you to bring that along and film it. We want you people to experience what they're doing to try to improve this hatchery.
So we'll be working with guys up and down the river and talking about that. Another issue that we have is how do we keep track of what we're doing? How do we know our stocking is affecting the fish caught? Well, nobody fishes more often, more frequently than the guides on our river. So we've been taking and talking and working a little bit. We haven't perfected anything yet. Maybe by area such as Swan Creek, maybe Pollock, Cow Creek, Whitlock. The guides that work out of there, we give them a form and they fill it out and they tell us how many walleye in the different classes they have caught for that month, and we send it into fisheries. And I would ask that the fisheries keep that just for their information and nobody else. So that's kind of the thought right now, and that has not been perfected yet. But I believe over the next 5 or 10 years, we'll be able to track what's going on. And you guys get some pretty hard information about what's being caught out there on 14 through 19-inch fish especially. So that's another thing we're proposing now, but it has not been cemented yet. We've talked to some of the guides and they have a little bit mixed emotion about that. Some of them haven't had a lot of fun with some of our law enforcement arms, so they'll have to work through all those issues as well. You know, I just thank all of you for coming tonight and participating in this. And we have a Jackie Chessie back there's got your registration card, you got an email address on there, and she's gonna be sending you information, continually sending you information about what's going on, what these guys are telling us, future meetings. I'll also say that by tomorrow night on the South Dakota Walleye Classic website, you'll be able to fill out that registration form. They'll have it up and running, and that way people can register to support this coalition online on sdwalleyeclassic.com. Abbott confirmed that they would be able to do that by tomorrow night, so that'll be helpful as well. At this point, I know there's some guys out here that have questions. Craig's going to come over and get to you, and I know you'll have some questions for some of these guys, so or for me or for Bill. So have at it. Give us your name and where you're from.
Yes, I'm Buddy. I'm originally from Aberdeen, South Dakota, but live down in Memphis now. Very retired, so glad that you put fish back in the river. Something to do.
Hold that mic right up in front of you.
Okay, so anyway, my hat's off to everybody in here for their involvement efforts in restoring the fish in the river. That's great. I do have, my question is for the fish. There is a project coming down the pipe that was just made public a few days ago in regards to a solar farm over 3,000 acres large. Been put in your new evidence. So my question is how proactive and involved does Game and Fish get before something like that even takes off the ground?
Sure, thank you for the question. I will admit that's a little outside the realm of fisheries, but what I would comment to is that we have staff that provide those comments. We have what's called an environmental review tool. So any project essentially that we would be involved in or on or around the landscape would be run through that tool, and that helps us develop comments. And then depending on the nature of it, that's where other state agencies come into play as well. So the best answer I can tell you is my guess is that specific project, I can't speak to it specifically, but my guess is that will be run through our environmental review tool with our environmental review coordinator. And then depending on what is found, and that looks at what species are there, if there's T&E species. Additionally, we'll partner with Department of Ag and Natural Resources if there's surface water aspects to it. But again, those are run through environmental tools that we have that survive comments. I can't speak to that one specifically, but there might be somebody in our staff that can, but I can tell you that's how we approach it though.
Do you get involved with county commissioners in their decision-making process?
You know, again, that kind of comes down to each specific project and who the stakeholders might be, but depending on what level of government it might be, county, township, municipality, we're generally at the table with them. And again, it's going to be project specific depending on, you know, again, who the stakeholders might be. But again, for this project specifically, I can't speak to it, but it wouldn't surprise me if we were. But again, it's going to go from our side through our environmental review tool, and then depending on what other permits or clearances are needed, that's where those other managing entities might come into play.
Okay, well, I imagine you'll probably hear more about it fairly soon, so I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mark, I've got a question for you. I heard a lot of comments when I was going through the roads, talking to people about smelt versus gizzard shed. Can you elaborate that a little bit? You told me several times one of the reasons that shark and Francis Case are so prolific with walleye is because of the gizzard shed. And maybe talk about how hard it is to get rainbow smelt anymore too.
Yep, so there's a number of reasons why we're pursuing gizzard shed over rainbow smelt. One of the most important ones for the anglers up here on the north side of Lake Oahe is cold water habitat. So everybody knows that this lake is dropping, so the amount of cold water habitat the amount of cold water habitat from the 212 bridge up to Pollock is being reduced. Every time that water comes down another foot, there's less cold water habitat up here. So if we did pursue rainbow smelt, we would. So if we wouldn't pursue rainbow smelt, we'd be making the walleye on lower Lake Oahe fat and happy, but it wouldn't do much for the walleye up here. So one of the benefits of gizzard shed. Next benefit of gizzard shed is it keeps our walleye shallow. So if you guys look back over the last 3 or 4 years, it seems like that bite has been moving deeper, and it seems to move deeper earlier every year. And that's because they don't have a lot of that warm water food up shallow to keep them there. The walleye will fall to the food no matter what. And so if we put shad in the system, again, instead of having to go out to 40, 50, 60 foot to catch those fish, you can stay in 20, 25 foot water. They'll just follow the food wherever they're at. Another big thing is we're going to have another flood. Over the next course, the course of history, we've had one major flood, 2011. We had lots of high water years. 2019 was a year with a lot of entrainment. We had a lot of fish coming through, even in 2019. You go back and we could build this smelt population back up, but we're one high flow event away from losing it all again. Gizzard shad would be a more stable fishery if we can get it in there. Another thing to look at is gizzard shad are
Maybe just yell.
Hey, I turned it off.
Oh, okay. Well, another comment too is the difference between Sakakawea and Oahe for the rainbow smelt. Here you
go. So what I was saying, another thing with gizzard shed, we look at some of the fastest growth of our young walleye. So walleye up to about 4 years of age, up to 14 to 16 inches. And some of our fastest growing walleye are based on gizzard shed diets. So in Angostura, 3-year-old walleye is hitting 17 inches. In Francis Case, 3-year-old walleye is hitting 16 inches. Consistently they're hitting over 15 inches in 3 years or less. Lake Oahe, when it was a gizzard shed dominated system back in 2004 up until about 2010, we saw growth rates that were pushing 17 inches in 3 years. And if you guys remember, back during that time, that was the heyday of gizzard shed, right? That's when gizzard shed were overwintering. We didn't stock them. They actually came down from Shade Hill, established over winter. but the growth rates of those young fish were astronomical back. Well, 2011 hit, we had a high water, the shad died because, they don't do well in the winter. We had some hard winters there at the end, 2009, 2010, 2011, we lost our shad. Shad produce very fast growing small walleye, which is what we want. We want those fish to get to a harvestable size as quick as possible so they can get in the hands of our anglers. Question Bill had was the difference between Lake Oahe and Skakawea. And this is a question we've had at every public meeting so far. Skakawea right now is doing great, it's doing fantastic, and it has even after the flood. But one of the biggest differences between Skakawea and Lake Oahe is the dam structures between the two reservoirs. So Lake Oahe, when they release a lot of water, it comes off the bottom of the lake, right? We have the what we call the Stilly Basin, and it just flushes large amounts of water from the bottom, and we lose our smelt, right? That's where the smelt hang out in that cold water. Skakawea, when they have high water releases, they have an overflow emergency spillway. So they actually drop the majority of their water from the upper 6 to 8 feet, of their water column, the warm water. So they don't lose the smell like Lake Oahe does when we have these high flow events. Now, we both have powerhouses that, run turbines and stuff, but during these high flow events, Skakawea can evacuate its water using the warm uppermost, couple to 6 feet down water, where Oahe, we flush it out of the bottom and we lose our smell. That's why Skakawea, after the flood, they were in much better shape, and they've been riding that for the last 10 years because they didn't lose the smell like we did. They stock walleye almost every year, similar numbers to what we stock or have been stocking, but they just kept that food resource in there over the last 10 years.
I have a question for either the Walleye Coalition or Game and Fish. If stocking walleye is the answer to solving our problems, and Game and Fish can't stock more than they are now, it takes us 5 to 7 years to get the new RAS system up and running. Do we have a plan for the next 5 to 7 years for Oahe? The numbers are great from what we had last year, the previous year, what we used to have, but what's Oahe look like the next 5 to 7 until when we get funding for an RAS, if we don't do a public-private partnership, what happens to Oahe in 2 years, in 3 years? Is it reduced limits? Is it, we have a new game fish, it's not a walleye fishery anymore, it's a catfish fishery. Does Game and Fish have a plan going forward for the next 5 to 7?
So our stock recommendations are based on abundance and growth. So I know the mills are pretty adamant, they want to see more fish stock, but I am hesitant with this because the growth is not what it was back in the mid-2000s. Our condition is good, but it's not great. We feel that 2.8 million is what the system can support at this time, and that's why we're really pushing to stock a lot of shad with that. With that being said, we have some capabilities to stock some more, again, coming out of the RAS systems. So we're proposing 2.8 million. There's still a little bit of wiggle room in Blue Dog where we could stock some more, but that's what we're comfortable with based on the growth that we're seeing, particularly of those small fish. Right now in Lake Oahe, a 3-year-old fish is only getting about 14 inches. Again, statewide, that's probably on average, but it's not where we want to see it. We want to see that growth hit 15 inches in 3 years. Once that happens, that we know there's enough food in the system, then we can really start pumping up the number of walleye we start stocking. But we don't want to get in a situation where we're seeing that growth decline because there's just too many mouths in the system and too many fish. Another part to that, you look 5 years down the road, and at some point, natural reproduction will take over from stocking. So, there's got to be a threshold in there where we say, okay, fish are being produced, we can stop stocking because it's happening naturally. And right now, we're setting that benchmark at about 5 to 6 fish, CPUEs, 5 or 6 fish per net night or whatever. Once we get to that point, we're at a good abundance. There's new fish coming in the system. That's another thing. Look at your class strength. We want to see new fish coming in the system and an overall abundance at or above 5 to 6 fish per net.
So my understanding, it's not a financial decision at all, as far as what's being stocked in Hawaii, as far as fingerlings, fry, or enough to stock or bait fish, it's just a numbers decision.
Right now, it's a numbers decision, and we stay away from fry as much as we can. So we did have 2 fry stockings. That's not what we request. Those are extra fish from the hatchery every year. We know fry don't do well in Lake Oahe, but if the hatchery has extra fish, we're going to put them in there every year. So our request is always the fingerlings, and it's based on the current structure of the fishery at the time. Now, once that changes, then all of a sudden the discussion of how many we stock, the size and where and everything will change, but that's for the future if, what changes here in the next 5 years.
That's been my point. We're talking about stocking and then wait and see what happens. I have all the respect in the world for the biologists, but I'm telling you, we don't have time to stop and wait and see what happens. We need to stock and feed them as much as we can, and also take their advice. We don't want to overstock and end up shooting ourselves in the foot. But we need to bring this thing back, and it's like cattle in your pasture. If you got plenty of feed out there, more than likely you can put some more cows in there. So just think about that over time. I'll keep spurring them on to more and more stocking, and I'm really excited about forage fish of any kind to make sure they're fed. So if we put in a large number of fingerlings and or adult small juvenile, we need to have enough food for them, and they need to do well, and these guys will survey it. And that's one of the reasons why I want to get the guides involved. As they fish, they can also tell us what they're finding in their creels when they catch these fish. Are they healthy? Are they fat? Are they looking good? What size are they? Are we starting to fill that mid class of fish? And that's what we're looking for. And without people that fish regularly on the river, and we get a consistent input on what's going on. Are there any more questions?
I watched you guys show the graphs tonight, and you talked about elevations in the water. And you talked about elevations all the years back. I seen it go up and down, but I never seen it get mismanaged like it did in 2008 to 2011. I had nothing with us, pointing fingers, I know what that was. Understand that they go by a book. The thing I see is you guys are taking eggs in the system. And I watched them up in Grand River when they first put that building. I think it was back in 1980. I don't know if you guys will remember that. But, and I always thought that was a great deal. But I really feel like all you've done is break the upper part of Lake Walleye. By that, I'm just saying, I know you guys, what I'm saying is, you have the numbers on how many eggs you took out of the 3 tributaries you've actually taken from? Have the numbers available?
No, but we could definitely get them. So last year was a low year. We took about 40 million eggs from the Grand River. We stopped pulling eggs out of the Roe last year, and the Cheyenne. It's been a number of years since we pulled eggs out of there. But last year was 40 million eggs out of Grand River.
That's kind of what I'm thinking about. You take 40 million eggs, and you took all of them and you stocked them back from the lower Lake Walleye. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
I've asked them all these years. And they come out of the mower over the Grand River. I asked them one time, give me a call. I want to watch. I want to see this happen. Guess what? I've never received.
You talked to the wrong person. I'd be happy to take you out there. I have the bills out there, and I always encourage people to come out.
When they stop, when they put them back, that's what I want to see.
Yeah, for sure.
Hey, I just never seen them do it.
Yep, and then the one thing to keep in mind too, when we pull those eggs out, the fraction of eggs that actually survive, like Bill was alluding to earlier, is very small. So in the wild, it takes a lot of eggs to make one juvenile walleye. When you move those into a hatchery, we control so much of the growth. We control predators. There's no predators in the hatchery. And the success rate of those eggs is so much higher that we're doing a huge benefit by raising those fish in a hatchery to the point where they've escaped a lot of that initial predation. They've survived. So if you look at, like Bill just said, 10% of the eggs that are dropped are fertilized. Well, in our situation, we're fertilizing almost all the eggs. 10% of the eggs that aren't fertilized hatch. Well, in the hatchery, we don't see that. And so, yes, we take 40 million eggs out of there, but how many of those would have actually turned into catchable walleye? Very, very small. Lake Oahe is never limited by the number of eggs in the system. It's always limited by the conditions that allow those eggs to survive and move on to the next stage. So eggs fry to fingerling, all the way up to an adult fish.
I understand that 1% of 40 million eggs is still a lot more than 0%.
That's true. One of the nice things about the hatcheries is we can direct where those fish are to go. So if we have a need in one area that we see the need is greater than in another area, we can move those fish throughout the system. If the hatch is bad in the lower end or the upper end, like it's been, we can take those eggs out, control how we raise them, and put them back in, which is the plan for next year.
It ain't gonna help us for the last 5 to 10 years. That we lost. That's why this is all about, what this is all about. We don't mind at all you guys doing your netting or whatever you do to raise more walleyes. But just give us our percentage back. That's all we want. That's all.
This is a wonderful discussion, and all of us have been involved in walleye fishing. Some of them are in business and catching walleye. A lot of us are just recreational fishermen. I got involved in this because I truly believe that this community has been the backbone for a lot of things that have gone on Lake Oahe, and I believe that we can be the backbone for the restoration of walleye in Lake Oahe as a whole. And we can work with our friends south and north and up and down the river to make this happen. And I know we have support. I need to thank Trevor Messenger, president of Dakota. He called me this morning and donated all the pop and water for tonight. He's one of our avid supporters. So ladies and gentlemen, I can tell you, we have some people with some punch that will help us get this done. We have the people that know how to do it. So now all we have to do is find the resources, put it together, and make the program work. So I encourage you to stay involved. Jackie will keep you informed, and we'll just continue this process. We'll have more meetings and more discussion. And I'll be working with you, asking for volunteers to go out with them to observe the stocking. And if you guys have GoPro cameras to take with you, to film it. We'd like to do that. We'd like to see it on the Game Fish Department website. We want to advertise to all of our friends that come and do business with the guides up and down the river that we're trying to fix this. And we're putting bait in there and we're stocking fingerlings. So please come and give us a try for walleye fishing. Don't leave without eating all those cookies. There's a lot of cookies back there, and you can take an extra can of pop with you if you want to in the water. But do thank you for coming, and we'll keep you posted on what's going on. Let's give these guys a big round of applause for coming up here and getting beat up. You guys gotta go home so you can go tomorrow.
Oh, yeah.
I'm surprised.
I didn't think about it too.
I wanted to just go.
Say that again. So. Start poking the bear. So he always says it's not. It's not always. I mean, you don't live in some.
Yeah, right.
So,
Hey, because it's just ever since they started that program. I think it's great. I just love it. I don't know if you guys. That building was the tanks inside there. You can see pictures of it.
I was down there. It's just a building or is it a building that's being pushed around? So it increased the more respect. That is. I just feel actual. In turn, they.